Hi, so we're often getting asked at the moment, will I be able to do my project in my budget? And this is before anybody's got any drawings done and quite early on in the stage when they're looking to engage our services. And so the first caveat to put in place there is really, when are you looking to start your project on site? And normally, if you're having early days conversations with us as the architects, it's likely to be sort of 6 months in advance. With all the will in the world, where costs are increasing and changing so frequently at the moment relative to the market economics, we're finding it's almost impossible to say where the costs will be in 6 months. And we're not just talking about 6 months. 6 months is when you might start the build, but it might be a further 4 or 5 months after that when you finish the build, and that is where the costs will be at that point. So quite often that's almost a year from the point that we're having the conversation, if not more. And as a result, will you be able to do the works in that budget? I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball, and I'm quite honest about that. And anybody that says that, yeah, you will, is probably clutching at straws a little bit, and you just want to be wary of that. So how can you kind of define what your budget is? Well, a lot of it depends on what it is you're looking to do. So be really clear about what you're looking to do, and your architect should then be able to advise you whether, based on current climate and current costs, whether that would be viable. So at least you know whether you can do the side extension and the loft conversion at the same time for your budget of 300k. And if it's not possible, at least you know from the outset, so you can kind of phase your project or consider what is most important to you and focus your attention in that regard. And then a lot of it will also depend on what finishes. And by that, I mean, all the final finishes, you can buy a £20 tile and you can buy £120 tile. And those are sort of per square meter prices. So when you start to look at the nitty gritty of it, that can have a massive impact. You could put underfloor heating in, or you could just leave your existing heating system. So the more you do, the more it will cost, but it's being really clear about what that entails that will start to give you quite an accurate feel on the costs and whether or not it's going to be within your budget. And with that, you will often find that people will come to us after they've started to speak to a builder, and builders come round based on what they're looking to do and given them a price. And again, word of caution there, what are they pricing against? Have you told them exactly what type of finishes you're going to have? Even simple things like changing the direction of your tiles or changing from a sort of plank wooden flooring into a herringbone flooring is all going to impact a builder's costs in terms of labor. And therefore, unless that is defined at the outset, you're probably getting sort of ballpark square meterage prices that are probably slightly out of date anyway, in order to catch favor at the very early stages to say, yeah, that'll be possible. They'll tie you in, and you'll be in a situation where quite often then as the build starts, it's a bit like, oh, this has now gone up, the prices of this has gone up, and it's all going to be a little bit more. And you want to avoid that kind of mission creep scenario, because you'll have a figure in your mind at that early days conversation that you're holding on to, and the builder will think that, well, he's got almost a green light to charge a little bit more because the market dictates that. So make sure you're really clear about what you're costing against and how those costs have been derived, because normally without a detailed set of drawings and a detailed specification and schedules, it is going to be quite difficult for a builder to pin down a price. So if you're comfortable with sort of vague prices that might fluctuate, then that's fine. But if you're not, then you really want to be able to get some of that detail out at the outset. And the other side of all of that, as kind of ties in with how to get a detailed price out of a builder, is a detailed specification that outlines what you're looking for. So in very simple terms, if we look at just insulation, you can get a multitude of different varieties of insulation, from what we call sort of man-made mineral fiber insulation, so the soft rock wool type of insulation, down to the harder PIR insulation, which is essentially a little bit more expensive, but has more thermal properties. So you might be looking at the offset against the thermal efficiency relative to the space. So if you're designing a small space, slightly more, you might spend a little bit more on a slightly more efficient insulation so that the walls are slightly thinner. But equally, if you're working in a more historic building, then you might want to consider alternative forms of insulation, like a fleece-based insulation, which would be more efficient for allowing for breathability. So there's different types of insulation. Those three different types in a nutshell have very, very different cost ranges, and defining that at the outset relative to what you require is obviously going to have an impact on the cost as well. So when somebody asks, can I do this work in my budget, a lot of it is, how long is a piece of string, and I don't have a crystal ball, but let's define what we can think is possible, and rattle it through so we can understand what we can do within that budget, rather than throwing everything in the kitchen sink and then realizing sort of further down the line that it's not going to be possible. Bearing in mind that prices are changing quite a lot at the moment, and what you currently hear as the current cost may not be the same case in 6 to 12 months time, and that is where it is becoming harder and harder, and even sort of saying that it might be 20% higher can be tricky, because we've seen so much fluctuation in the market where some items are going down in price. So steel went up massively in the last 12 months, but also has come down, but equally other things haven't. So it's just getting a fair sense of what is possible, and what will be possible when you eventually go out to build. Hope that was a little bit useful. For a little bit more about costs in 2023, there are some further videos and articles on the website.